They didn't know I was standing behind the kitchen archway when she said it. The lights were low and everyone was laughing. Glasses clinked. Someone had just poured another round of wine. It was supposed to be a quiet birthday dinner. My late husband's birthday. Actually, but I guess they thought of it more like a social catch-up. I had just stepped into the hallway to get my shawl from the coat rack. Took maybe 15 seconds. When I walked back, I heard her voice, bright and sharp. Not drunk, not quiet. Just clear. Why is she even here? A few chuckles followed. Not from everyone, but enough. I stood there for a second longer than I should have. My hand was on the edge of the wall. They couldn't see me. Maybe if they had, someone would have shifted, cleared their throat, changed the subject. But no one did. I stepped in with a smile on my face, just like I had rehearsed in 100. Other moments, sat down quietly, reached for the breadbasket, listened to them talk about their lawn renovations and some cruise someone was planning. That was the night. I knew I was done pretending I hadn't heard. I'm Margaret Eleanor Bell. I'm 71. And that was the moment I knew I didn't belong to them anymore. At least, not in any way that mattered. Subscribe. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Thanks. I married Robert when I was 23. He wasn't the first man who noticed me, but he was the first one who stayed. We had a small white house in Springfield, a garden out back, and a son we named Peter. I gave my life to them. No exaggeration. I baked birthday cakes from scratch. Sat through endless football games I didn't understand, and ironed every single shirt he ever wore for work. My life was a series of soft routines, and I was proud of that. When Peter was little, he used to run down the hallway in mismatched socks, yelling for me to look at his drawings. I still have one tucked inside my prayer book. A stick figure family with a heart overhead. He labeled each of us, Mommy, Daddy, me. He was kind, sweet even. For a long time, but something shifted after Robert passed. My son got quieter. His wife, Danielle, got louder. At first, I chalked it up to grief. We were all grieving. But then came the comments, little ones, about how I was always around, about how I should get out more, see my own friends. Then the whispers about the will. Robert had left the house to me fully. But Peter had always assumed it would eventually be his. And I had no reason to challenge that, until I started hearing them talk like it already belonged to them, as if I was just a temporary guest. That night, after Danielle's question, why is she even here? I didn't say anything, not out loud. But something shifted inside me, quietly and finally. 2 days later, I was cleaning out a drawer in the upstairs study, when I found a folder I had forgotten about. It had the original deed to the house, my name on every page. Robert's signature, too, dated and notarized. For a moment, I just held it. My fingers ran across the ridges of the seal. Then I remembered the conversation I had overheard in the kitchen. Danielle telling someone she couldn't wait to redo the floors once we sold it. Peter saying it was time they finally had space. They hadn't said those things to me. They said them around me, above me, as if I wasn't fully present. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked out the window at the garden I had once planted. Every tulip in the blooms were gone now, dirt and roots waiting for spring. And I realized, didn't want to be in that garden anymore. I started small, quietly. I made an appointment with the notary. I updated my will. I contacted an old friend who had once worked in estate planning. I didn't tell anyone. I wasn't being spiteful, just stopped pretending I didn't matter. Danielle had asked why I was even there. The real answer was, I had been there before. She arrived. I had laid the bricks of that house with my bare hands, figuratively and literally. I had bled into the soil, loved through the walls, held my husband as he took his last breath on that same couch she now lounged on while scrolling her phone. And if they couldn't remember that, then maybe they didn't deserve to stay. The decision came to me while I was folding laundry. A sock slipped from my hand. That's when I said it, just to myself. I'm selling the house. It wasn't a dramatic moment, just a soft, clear truth. That weekend, I smiled through brunch. listened as Danielle said something about taking a girls' trip and how they were already planning to convert the guest room into a nursery. I nodded, buttered my toast, drank my coffee slowly. By Monday, I had spoken to the realtor. The paperwork was drawn up by Wednesday. On Friday, I stood by the kitchen counter again. Same spot, same archway. Peter and Danielle were chatting about colors. For the baby's room. That's when I told them I've sold the house. We close in 2 weeks. I've already found a place to stay. There was silence. For a moment, you could hear the wind tick the windows. Danielle blinked. Peter asked me what I meant. I repeated myself softer. If I've sold the house, no fight, no debate. Just finality. They were stunned, but not heartbroken. Just inconvenienced, and that told me everything I needed to know. I used to think love meant sacrifice. That's what I was raised on. My mother gave everything to her family. Her time, her body, her voice. She used to say, "We bend because we care." I took that with me into marriage. I bent until I didn't know what it felt like to stand. Robert was a decent man. He wasn't perfect. He had a temper, and he liked things just so. But he never laid a hand on me. And sometimes, that alone felt like enough to be grateful for. Funny how we learn to measure love by the absence of violence. He worked long hours. I made the house feel soft for him. Ironed the sheets, lit candles, wore perfume on Thursdays, because he said he liked jasmine. I didn't even like jasmine. It gave me headaches. But I wore it, and when Peter was born, my world shrank to a soft little blanket and a pair of tiny socks. I didn't mind. Used to watch him sleep and feel this ache in my chest, like I would die before I ever let something bad touch him. He was the kind of baby that reached for your hand without even looking, the kind that fell asleep in the middle of his mashed peas. I kept every little drawing, every macaroni necklace, every letter to Santa where he spelled my name with a T instead of a D. Marked Dot, when he was 9, he fell off his bike and cried so hard he couldn't catch his breath. I held him on the sidewalk until he stopped shaking. His hands were small then. He used to call me his best friend. I remember the first time I saw Danielle. She was wearing high boots and lipstick that didn't match her blouse. She smiled at me like she already knew what I was going to say. That's what stood out to me, the confidence, like she had no reason to win me over. Peter was enchanted. He kept looking at her like she was magic. I didn't say much. I learned early that if a mother speaks too soon, she becomes the villain. So I held my tongue and made tea. They married fast. It's just under a year. I helped pay for the reception, even though no one asked me to. I just wanted it to feel right. I gave them the downstairs guest bedroom so they could save for their own place. Danielle said it was just temporary. That word rang in my ears even then. They stayed 3 years. I cooked dinners, folded laundry, and stayed out of their business. When they had arguments, I turned up the radio. When Danielle slammed a door, I told myself she was just young. When Peter stopped saying thank you, I told myself he was just tired. It was like living in a house that used to be mine but now had different rules. Like being a guest with no departure date. One night, I overheard Danielle telling her sister that I was a shadow. That I just floated around the house like I didn't know when to leave. I stood in the hallway and swallowed the lump in my throat. I told myself it was just words. It's just stress. But shadows have ears too, and hearts. That's when I started keeping notes. Not out of pettiness, out of clarity. Dates, bills, small conversations. The kind of details you remember when you know. The ground is shifting under you. Peter never asked me how I was doing. Not once. He asked if I could grab groceries, if I could babysit her niece, if I could stay out of the living room during their shows, but never how I was. I didn't say anything when they started using the second bathroom as their own, or when Danielle started calling the upstairs office her space. I just made adjustments. I moved my books into the bedroom. I kept my coffee quiet in the mornings. I learned to walk without creaking the floors. Some part of me thought they would notice. That one day Peter would look up from his phone and see me. That he would say, "Mom, I miss you." But he never did. When Robert died, Peter gave a eulogy that talked more about his own childhood than about the man himself. Danielle stood next to me during the service, but didn't hold my hand. I noticed, felt like a silence that had a sharp edge. After the funeral, they didn't ask if I needed anything. They asked where the keys were. To the shed. To the filing cabinet, to the safe. I gave them what they wanted. I was tired. Grief dulls your ability to argue. I just wanted to sleep without waking up at 3 a.m. wondering where his socks were. Months passed, and slowly I became furniture. Polite, quiet, easy to move. My voice got softer, my presence smaller dot, until that birthday dinner, until she said it. Why is she even here? That one sentence cut through years of soft tolerance, of silent meals, half-hearted hugs. It wasn't just rude. It was truth, her truth, spoken out loud. They didn't see me as part of their world anymore. I was an obstacle, a misplaced artifact, and so I stopped bending. That night. After they went to bed, I walked out into the yard and stood under the porch light. The tulips were still trying to push through the cold soil. They looked stubborn. I admired that. I whispered to the wind, I am still here, and I am mine. Then I walked back inside and began my quiet undoing. The betrayal didn't come in the form of shouting or slammed doors. It came quietly, folded into everyday things. That's how I almost missed it. There was a morning in early April. I had just come back from the pharmacy, picked up a refill for Peter's blood pressure medication. Yes, I still did that. Not because I was asked. It's just out of habit. Love is a habit sometimes. When I walked into the kitchen, I saw papers on the table. Open, careless. A bright yellow envelope with a notary seal on the corner. I didn't plan to look. I just glanced. It's the way you do when something feels off. What? I saw made me sit down without meaning to. It was a draft of a transfer of ownership. The house. My house. There, in black ink, was Peter's name, and Danielle's next to mine. As if it were being split. As if I was agreeing to it. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Surely someone had misfiled something. Maybe it was for insurance. Maybe it wasn't what I thought it was. But the line was clear. Margaret Bell agrees to jointly sign over the title of property located at our hands when cold. I reread the sentence 3 times. There was no note, no explanation, just a draft and a pen sitting beside it, as if they expected me to sign without question. I folded the paper slowly, put it back exactly how I found it. Then I poured myself tea. Jasmine, oddly enough, it's the same kind Robert used to like. It's tasted like dust. Peter didn't mention it that day. Neither did Danielle. We had dinner as usual, roast chicken, herbed potatoes. She said something about a friend who was redoing their kitchen. Peter talked about a new project at work. I nodded along. I watched the candle burn down. I listened to the scraping of forks, and I decided to keep my silence a little longer. Not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to see if they would tell me themselves. If there was any part of them that still believed I deserved the truth. Week passed, nothing. The paper sat in the drawer by the fridge, half covered by coupons. One evening, while I was folding laundry in the back room, I heard Danielle talking. On the phone. I don't think she knew I was home. She was laughing. Saying how once the paperwork was done, they could finally fix the roof and paint the exterior. She called it her house twice. I stood there, my hands deep in a basket of towels, and let the warmth drain from my fingers. It wasn't about the paint. It wasn't about the roof. It was about how easily they erased me from the picture, like I had been a temporary name on a lease, and then came the final proof. Peter left his laptop open in the living room one night. I didn't mean to look. Truly, I didn't. But the screen flickered on when I walked past. An email thread was open. Danielle had written to a real estate agent. She asked about the process of removing a Conner from a title after a transfer. She wanted to know if it could be done quietly, quickly. The words stung more than I thought they would. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the fan spinning above me like it had somewhere to be. It wasn't just betrayal. It was a rewriting of memory, of ownership, of worth. They didn't just want the house. They wanted me gone on paper. And in presence, I got up around 4 a.m., walked to the kitchen, sat at the table. And that's when I opened the small wooden box I kept under the sink. Inside was the original title. The one Robert and I had signed together 25 years ago. My name, his name, no one else. I took it out, laid it flat on the table, ran my fingers across the ink. It had faded slightly, but it was still mine. I sat with it for a long time, and then I wrote a note to myself. They will not get to erase me. Not from this house. Not from this life. The next day, I called a lawyer. Quiet voice, steady tone. I made an appointment for the following Thursday. I didn't tell anyone. I just marked the day with a small dot on my calendar. Blue ink. It's peaceful color dot. At the appointment, I brought every document I had. The title, the bills. The letter Robert had once written to me saying the house would always be mine, no matter what happened to him. The lawyer, a kind woman with silver glasses, read everything carefully. She looked up and asked, "Has anyone coerced you?" I smiled. No, they didn't need to. They just assumed I wouldn't notice. She nodded like she'd heard that story before. Over the next week, I had the title reaffirmed. The will restructured. Power of attorney reassigned. I removed Danielle's name from everything. She was never legally on it, but I removed even the possibility. I updated every document, every clause, every page, and I made copies. Dozens. I stored one at the bank, one with the lawyer, one under the mattress, one in a safety deposit box I never told anyone about. I wasn't preparing for a war. I was preparing for silence, for dignity, for clarity. They could laugh, they could plan, they could dream about my disappearance, but I would not disappear. I was done being a background figure in a story I built. They never even saw it coming, and that somehow was the most painful part. That they didn't think I would fight? That they thought I didn't matter enough to resist? But I did. And now? No, it was their turn to learn what silence can do. I didn't slam a door. I didn't pack a suitcase in rage or leave a note on the fridge. That would have given them too much power to believe they'd broken something in me. Instead, I moved in silence. It's the way women do when they've had enough. I started waking up earlier, before the kettle whistled, before Danielle stomped. Through the hallway, clicking on lights like she owned the sun. I made quiet phone calls to storage places. Talked to the realtor again. Ordered document boxes. And then one morning, I opened the top drawer of my desk, took out a small notebook with a flower on the cover, and began making a list. I wrote things I need to keep, things I can let go of, things that were never mine. To begin with, by the end of that week, I had 3 full pages. I didn't cry once, not even when I packed Robert's cufflinks. Not even when I found the birthday card Peter made me in 2nd grade, the one that said, "You are the best cooker." And my heart. Pain has a strange way of settling into stillness when it's had too many years to stretch out. I boxed my memories, my photos, my name. I opened a new bank account at a small branch 2 towns over. No one knew the password but me. I called the electric company and took my name off their usage. I let the internet bill transfer to them. Quiet moves. Administrative. Final, when they asked why the Wi-Fi was acting strange, I just shrugged and said, maybe call the provider. That weekend, Danielle posted a photo of the house on her social media. A selfie on the porch. The caption said, "Love making a home that's ours." Ours. I stared at the screen until the image blurred. Then I closed the app and deleted it from my phone. Somewhere in my chest, I heard the soft crack of another thread. Breaking. It's a kind of snap that doesn't make a sound in the room, but echoes inside your ribs. A few days later, Peter asked if I could stay at a friend's for a while, just while they did renovations. He said it casually, like he was asking me to pick up milk. Said it might be easier for everyone. Less crowded. I nodded. Said I'd think about it. That night, I booked a motel room. Just for 2 nights, small, off the highway. Clean towels and a chair by the window. I didn't tell them, didn't leave a note. I just left. I stood in the driveway that morning and looked back at the house. The curtains Danielle had picked out. The front door Peter never fixed. The flower bed I had planted every spring for 25 years. It was still my house. Legally, but spiritually. It had been slipping away from me for a long time. I got in the car and drove with the windows down. The wind was loud and I let it be. When I got to the motel, I didn't unpack. I sat on the bed with my keys in my lap, listened to the hum of the air conditioner, felt the stillness settle in around me. There in that plain little room, I breathed without flinching. I had no one to cook for, no one to tiptoe around, no one to ask me why I was still here. I stayed 2 nights, then 2 more. I bought a small lamp for the nightstand and a packet of wildflower seeds from a gas station. I didn't know where I'd plant them. I just needed something that promised beauty later. On the 5th day, I called my lawyer. She asked if I wanted to go ahead with everything. I said yes. That same afternoon, I drove back to the house. Not to explain, just to finish what I had started. Peter was in the driveway. Danielle was carrying a box labeled books from the garage to the porch. She looked confused when she saw me, asked if I was back early. I smiled, walked past her, up the steps, into the house I had once made a home. I walked straight to the study and pulled the envelope out of the top drawer. When I came back out, I handed it to Peter. Inside were copies of the updated will, the revised title, the lawyer's letter confirming sole ownership. I didn't say much, just this: everything has been updated. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be. Danielle's mouth opened, then closed. Peter looked pale. He held the envelope like it might bite. I left without waiting for a response. Back in the car, I felt no victory, only relief. That night, I checked into a longer-term rental, small cottage near the edge of town, wooden floors, a quiet porch. Lock I chose myself. I unpacked slowly, lit a candle, then I sat on the floor, held the wildflower seeds in my palm, and whispered. I made it out. I had no plan beyond that. Just the knowledge that I was free, not from them, but from the version of me who had waited too long to be seen, and I would never go back to her. I kept the curtains open the first night in the cottage. Not out of forgetfulness. I just wanted to see the dark stretch of trees outside, the way the moon found the roof. How quiet could be a comfort. It wasn't a grand place. 1 bedroom, a stove that clicked twice before it lit, and windows that rattled a little when the wind picked up. But it was mine, fully, quietly mine. No one asked me to make tea. No one asked if I could stay out of the way. No one looked through me like I was a thing they hadn't yet thrown away. That first morning I made coffee and sat barefoot by the screen door. A bird hopped across the grass, stopped, looked at me, then flew away. It felt like a small conversation, like the world was telling me, you are still here. And it's not too late. I spent the next week rearranging the space. Put the worn armchair near the window, hung a scarf over a lamp to make the light softer. I framed the photo of Robert and me from our 25th anniversary. Not because I missed him, but because some parts of my life still mattered, even if they didn't survive. I started reading again. Not just cookbooks or cleaning tricks from magazines, but actual novels. I found one at the thrift store about a woman who ran away and changed her name. I didn't need to change mine, but I understood the impulse. Each day I did something small that made the place mine. Put nails in the wall, labeled the pantry jars, watered the porch plants with a chipped mug that said "World's Okayest Mom." I bought it myself. It made me laugh, and I didn't tell anyone where I was. Not Peter, not Danielle, not the neighbors from the old block who used to nod politely, but never once asked how I was after Robert passed. They had their version of the story, I had mine, and mine didn't require approval. 2 weeks after I left, I got my first voicemail. It was Peter. His voice sounded tight, strained, like he'd practiced what to say but couldn't quite pull it off. He said he was sorry things had gotten uncomfortable, said they were surprised by the changes and just needed time to process. Then he said they couldn't find the keys to the shed and asked if I had them. Not once did he ask if I was okay. Not once did he say he missed me. I didn't call back. The next message came a few days later. Danielle, this time, her voice had that clipped edge, polite but tired. She said the house was harder to manage than they thought, that the roof leak had worsened, that they were thinking maybe it would be better to reconsider things. She asked if I wanted to talk. I didn't. I saved the voicemail. Not out of sentiment, but as proof that their confidence was cracking. That next message was different. It was my grandson. He's only 9. Sweet voice. He said, "Grandma, I miss your muffins." And then he whispered, "Mommy said I shouldn't call." That one stayed with me longer, not because it pulled me back, but because it reminded me why I had stayed as long as I did. Why I had put up with silence and cruelty and invisibility. Love that. Little boy didn't erase me, but I couldn't go back. Not even for him. Some things once lost cannot be rebuilt in the same place. So I wrote him a letter. I kept it simple. Told him I was okay. Told him I missed him too. Told him I was baking again. And that I hoped one day he'd learn my recipe. I didn't mail it. I folded it and placed it inside a book he once liked about bears and blueberries, and told myself if he finds me one day, I'll give it to him. But I wouldn't force anything. That was the old me. The one who thought love meant staying no matter the bruises, even the invisible ones. Now, I believed love could also mean I will not let you hurt me again. And I will not apologize for leaving. It's a strange thing to reclaim your space when you've lived so long inside someone else's comfort. But it gets easier. I started walking in the evenings, past the creek, down the gravel road where no one honks, no one rushes. I'd nod at the postman, started calling me Miss Bell. I liked that. There's a woman who runs the corner store, Marisol. She's in her 50s, wears red lipstick and laughs from her belly. She asked me once if I was new around here. I said, not new, just finally arrived. She smiled, said, welcome home. That night I cried for the first time. Not because I was sad, because someone saw me and didn't ask for anything in return. I made a habit of visiting her shop. Bought a tin of cookies I didn't need. Bought a plant I didn't know how to care for. Bought postcards with birds on them, just to remind myself that migration isn't the end of home. Sometimes it's the beginning. I didn't erase my past. I just stopped letting it write the rest. Peter and Danielle sent one final letter. It arrived 3 weeks after I moved in. They asked if we could talk, said they didn't want things to end badly. The envelope was cream-colored. It's the kind you send wedding invitations in. I read it once, then again, and I didn't answer. Some things don't need closure. Some things are closed the moment you walk away and never look back. I thought they might stop reaching out eventually. But people rarely let go of what they thought they owned. About a month after I left, the tone began to shift. Not in their voices, but in their urgency. I received a text from Peter one morning. Just a single line. Mom, we need to talk about the house. No greeting. No warmth. Just a line about the property, as if that was all I ever was to them now. A title on a deed. A name next to theirs. They wanted erased. I didn't respond. That evening, a new voicemail arrived. Danielle, her voice sharper now, less performative. She said things were getting complicated, that some bills were still in my name, that they needed access to certain documents I had removed. Then she said, in that clipped, condescending tone I had grown used to, we didn't think you'd take it thus far, as if reclaiming what was mine, my life, my name. My dignity was a declaration of war. They had thought I'd bend, that I'd cave to guilt or nostalgia or fear. But I didn't feel fear. I felt air. I felt space. I felt clean. Still, their panic began to bloom. A week later, a letter arrived from a lawyer. Theirs, not mine. Formal. Cold. Worded in a way that was meant to intimidate without sounding overtly cruel. They requested a discussion of shared ownership rights and expressed interest in a mutual agreement on the property's future. I read it over tea, cinnamon and mint, a new favorite I'd found at the market down the road. Then I forwarded it to my own lawyer with 2 words. No response. I would not entertain their rewritten stories. I would not be pulled back into a house that had stopped being a home the moment I became invisible inside it. The house was no longer my concern, not emotionally, only legally. And legally, I had already won. I kept to my quiet life. Grocery runs on Tuesdays, walks on Thursdays. Sometimes I'd take a book to the bench near the lake and just watch the ripples carry the light. But they kept unraveling. A neighbor from the old street, one of the ones who never asked much of me except polite waves, called me out of the blue. She said Danielle had told people I was unwell, that I had suddenly left and they were worried. I thanked her for the call, didn't correct anything. Let them believe I was unstable, if that's what made them feel better. Their story wasn't mine to fix anymore. But I knew that truth was cracking. Danielle had posted a status. My friend Marisol showed it to me, saying family drama had ruined what could have been a beautiful chapter. A few comments followed, some sympathetic, some vague, but the tone had changed. They were no longer confident. They were exposed, unsettled, diminished. They couldn't find a way to spin it clean. Because the story of a woman leaving in silence with dignity and her name intact is not an easy villain to create. One day, I opened my email and found a message I didn't expect. It was from a distant cousin, one I hadn't spoken to in years. She wrote, "I heard what happened. I just wanted you to know you're not alone." I did something similar. Took me 59 years to say, enough. I sat with that sentence for a long time. Took me 59 years. It didn't feel like a confession. It felt like a lifeline. It's a quiet sisterhood. Women like us, we don't explode. We erode. And then one day we stop being soft about it. We walk out. And we let the silence speak in our place. The more I stayed quiet, the louder their consequences became. I heard through the same polite neighbor who now seemed unsure what side to stand on, that Peter and Danielle had considered selling the house. But the market wasn't good. Repairs they ignored were now catching up. The roof I warned them about had finally begun leaking into the upstairs bedroom Danielle had tried to paint. Over the mold, cheap paint. Didn't last. The bills, now fully in their names, had risen. The cost of maintenance, of pretending ownership, of forcing a home out of something that had been rooted in someone else's sacrifice. And the funny thing was, I didn't feel satisfaction. Just peace. It was like watching weeds grow in a garden I no longer had to tend. I stayed away from the old street. Didn't drive by, didn't ask, didn't care. I was building something else. One afternoon, I bought a small desk. Light wood, narrow enough to fit near the window. I sat there and wrote letters. Not to Peter, not to Danielle, to myself. Letters from the version of me who had stayed too long. And from the version who had finally left. I burned a few of them in the fireplace. Not out of anger, but out of reverence. Letting go 1 page at a time. That week, I wrote 3 new words in the flowered notebook. I kept since the beginning of this undoing. They will learn. Not through revenge, not through punishment, but through absence. They would learn what it meant to no longer have access to the person who once showed up no matter what. And I would learn that peace isn't loud. It's not a speech. It's not a final word. It's a door closed gently behind you. And the knowledge that no one else holds the key. I never imagined starting over would feel this quiet. There were no parades, no fresh starts with glitter or streamers, just small mornings, a mug that stayed warm, a room that didn't feel like it belonged to someone else. My name was on the lease, My name was on the mailbox. It's just mine, it still startled me sometimes how calm my body had become. I didn't flinch at slammed car doors. I didn't pause before turning the hallway corner. I didn't shrink when someone walked behind me, because there was no one shouting, no one sighing. When I entered the room, no one asking if I could just give them a little space. I had all the space now, and slowly I began to fill it. Not with noise, not with company, but with a life that fit my bones. I got to know the town in pieces. The quiet library with creaky floorboards. The bakery run by an old couple who argued about frosting but still held hands when no one was looking. I found a second-hand shop tucked between a florist and a laundromat. Bought a soft yellow sweater and a vase that reminded me of my mother's. The woman behind the counter asked where I was from. I said, here. Now she smiled like she understood. I started volunteering at the church pantry on Wednesdays. Nothing. Grand, just sorting cans, handing out soup, remembering names. There was a woman named Della who always wore a blue scarf and brought me apples from her tree. She didn't ask about my past, just told me I had kind eyes. I hadn't heard that in years. Once at the market, a boy held the door open for me and said, "After you, ma'am." I almost said thank you twice. Not because I forgot, but because I wasn't used to being seen, not as an inconvenience, not as a placeholder, just a person. One Sunday, I sat by the lake with a notepad and wrote a list. It wasn't about tasks. It was about moments. Moments where I had felt like myself again. Lighting a candle without asking. Drinking the last of the orange juice without guilt. Dancing to an old song in the living room just because I liked the way it sounded in the silence. None of these were dramatic. But they were mine. There is a kind of healing that doesn't announce itself. It just slips in like light under a door. One quiet morning at a time. Sometimes I thought about Peter, about who he used to be. The little boy who ran through sprinklers and begged me for one more story at bedtime. That child is gone, and I don't blame him for growing up. What? I do. Hold him accountable for who he chose to become. He had my tenderness once, and he used it like a doormat. Danielle never loved me. That was clear from the start. But Peter, he stopped seeing me the moment she made it convenient, and still I did not wish them pain, only distance. And the kind of silence that teaches. I got a letter from them one day, forwarded from the old address. Inside was a photograph. My grandson, holding a sign that said, "Miss you." Behind him, Danielle's handwriting. "We want you back in his life." I stared at the photo for a long time. He looked taller. His eyes softer than I remembered. But the note wasn't written by him. It was written by the same hand that once asked, "Why is she even here?" And now they wanted me back. Not because they missed me, but because the loss was finally real. I didn't reply. I folded the photo and placed it inside a small box I kept beneath my bed, the one filled with things I wasn't ready to burn, but wouldn't display either. Some people think forgiveness means going back. For me, it means walking forward without dragging the past behind me like a suitcase I never packed. The boy in the photo will grow. One day he may ask questions, and maybe I'll be there to answer them. But not now. Not while the apology still belongs to someone else's mouth. I've learned that apologies without change are just performances. I don't need another act. I need peace. That night, I lit a candle, wrote my name on a new journal. Margaret E. Bell. Not just a mother, not just a wife. Not just someone's burden. Me. I filled the first page with this line: I am allowed to exist without explanation. Then I turned off the lights and slept through the night without dreams. It was a Sunday afternoon. When I saw Peter again, I hadn't planned for it. I had gone into town for dish soap and eggs, nothing more. I'd just stepped out of the hardware store when I heard a voice say my name. Not Mom, not Ma, just Margaret. I turned, and there he was, older than I remembered. His face, softer, hair thinner, eyes tired in a way I couldn't place. He looked like someone who hadn't slept well in months. He didn't smile. Neither did I. He asked if I had time. I said I didn't know. We walked to the bench outside the pharmacy, the same one where I sometimes sat to rest my legs or watch the buses pass. He asked how I was. I said I was fine. He nodded slowly, said he'd heard I was living nearby, that they'd tried to reach me. I said I knew. He looked down at his hands for a while, then said something I hadn't expected. You didn't deserve any of it. The words came out like they had been trapped in his throat. He said Danielle was sorry, that things had gotten out of hand, that they had never meant to make me feel like I didn't belong. I stayed quiet because those things weren't true. They had meant it. They just didn't like the consequences. He talked for a while, said their marriage was strained, said the house didn't feel the same without me, said their son, my grandson, asked about me more often now. I listened. Let him fill the air with his version when he paused. I said only this: you didn't stand up for me. He looked like the wind had been knocked out of him. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just said what I had carried. You let her talk about me like I was nothing. You let me fade into the background of a home I built. You called it love. He said he hadn't known what to do, that he was caught between things. I said I had been caught too, for years, between silence and duty, between self-erasure and motherly grace. He wiped his hands on his jeans, said he understood now. I said it was too late for understanding then. I stood. He asked if I'd ever come back. I said, back where? That house isn't mine anymore, and neither is the version of me you knew. He looked at the ground again. Didn't argue. As I walked away, I heard him say something, not loud, but enough to carry. I miss you. I kept walking, because love without protection isn't love at all. That night, I sat by the window and let the dark settle around the cottage. I felt steady, not triumphant, just clear. He had come not for me, but for his peace. But mine had already been earned. 2 days later, a letter arrived. It was from Danielle. She didn't write much, just a few lines. I said terrible things. I thought, you would always be there. I was wrong. There was no plea, no manipulation, just a kind of flat honesty. I folded the letter and placed it in the same box as the photograph of my grandson. Maybe one day I'd show it to him. Maybe not, but I kept it, not as a keepsake. It's evidence. Not that they changed, but that I did, that I had once been erased. And then learned how to rewrite my own name the next week. I planted the wildflower seeds I'd bought months ago, the ones I kept meaning to toss. I dug into the soft earth with my bare hands, pressed each seed into the dirt with care. Then I whispered something to the ground. I forgive you, but I don't want you back. It wasn't about Peter or Danielle, it was about the old version of me, the one who thought silence was safer, the one who made herself small just to keep the peace, the one who waited too long to be seen. I wanted her to rest now, to be buried gently beneath these blossoms. Let the flowers bloom in her name. Let them say what she never could. I am still here, but I do not belong to you. The flowers bloomed in late spring, not all at once, just a few at first. Pale blue, then soft yellow, then something wild and purple I couldn't name. They weren't neat, not the way Danielle would have liked. She always wanted things symmetrical, staged. These grew crooked, bold, free. I watched them from the porch, each morning, coffee warming my hands. They reminded me of myself, scattered, strong, and still alive. It had been 4 months since I left. I no longer counted the days. I didn't flinch when I passed a family of 3 at the market. I didn't check my phone for messages that never came. I had stopped waiting. One afternoon, I went through the small box I kept under the bed, the one where I kept the letter from Danielle, the photo of my grandson, and that folded page from long ago, the original deed with my name still firm and whole. I read them all. One last time, then I lit a match. I started with the letter, watched the corners curl, the ink pull away into smoke. The photo next, not because I hated it, but because I no longer needed to hold what wasn't offered with care. Last. The deed. That was the hardest. Not because I regretted what I had done, but because it represented all the years I had poured myself into something that never protected me. When the flame reached the center, I whispered goodbye, not to the house, to the woman who stayed too long. I scattered the ashes into the soil beside the wildflowers. Then I stood back and let the wind carry what it wanted. A week later, I received one final letter. This one from Peter. It was longer than the others. He said he respected my decision, said he finally understood what he had been part of. He didn't ask for a visit, didn't ask for forgiveness, just thanked me for everything I had done. And for walking away. I cried that night. Not out of grief, but out of something softer, something like release. Because sometimes closure doesn't come from answers. It comes from no longer needing them. I folded his letter and placed it in my new journal. Not to revisit, but to honor. Not all wounds stay open. Some become lines we trace when we forget how strong we've become. The cottage became a home. Marisol invited me over for coffee on Fridays. I said yes. We didn't talk much about the past, just the weather, her niece's wedding, a new casserole. She was trying. Della from the pantry gave me a small wooden sign that read, "Peace is a room with your name on the door." I hung it by the front entrance. Every time I passed it, I smiled. I started baking again, my own recipes, not the ones I used to make for Peter or his son. These were for me. Lavender bread, cardamom cake, apple crumble, just the way I liked it, with too much cinnamon and a burnt edge. I mailed one small tin to the church and signed the card from Margaret. No titles, no role. Just me. One evening, I walked down to the lake with a photo of myself as a young woman. I had kept it tucked in a book for years. Black and white, smiling, but shy. 21, just before marrying Robert. I looked at her for a long time. She didn't know what was coming, didn't know how many nights she would cry into a pillow no one heard, didn't know how hard she would try to keep a family whole, while breaking quietly herself. But she held her head up. Even then, I whispered to her, not with pity, but with pride, "You made it." And then I let her go, dropped the photo into the water and watched it soften, then sink. It didn't feel like losing. It felt like returning. That night, I wrote one last entry in my journal. No reflections, no lists, just a single line. This time I decide who gets to call me anything else. Then I closed the book, turned off the lamp, and let the quiet take me. Not the kind of quiet that stings, the kind that says, "You are safe. You are enough. You are home." The end.